Parents deceived me over a medical emergency to steal my $155,000 wedding fund for my siblings' honeymoon, and how I got married in secret and bankrupted them. Hey, so I'm a 26-year-old female, and I recently got hitched to my husband, who's also 26. We've been together for 6 years and decided to have a cozy, intimate ceremony at his aunt's farmhouse. This wasn't our original plan at all. I'd always dreamed of a beach wedding because the beach holds some of our happiest memories. We're total water babies and used to go there at least once a month to relax and have fun. I even started looking at hotels by the sea for our guests to stay at. Like every other bride, I wanted my wedding to be super special. I'd been saving up for a big celebration for the past 5 years. I work in advertising and make a decent amount, but my husband and I always lived modestly to save for the future. We had planned to book one of the best sea-facing hotels so our guests could have an amazing time. But we had to switch our plans and downsize the whole thing because my parents borrowed $115,000 from me a few months ago, and I couldn't say no. For some context, my brother, 24M, also got married a while back, but it was a sudden thing for him. He'd been with his wife for about 2 years and proposed just a month before the wedding. It was a really small ceremony, just family and close friends. So, a few weeks after my brother's wedding, my mom reached out asking for money. She said my dad had suddenly fallen ill, probably due to his diabetes, and she couldn't handle the medical expenses. She mentioned there was this special drug the doctors recommended, but it was super pricey and not covered by insurance. Worried about my dad's health, I lent her the money without a second thought. I visited a few times and asked my mom to show me the medical reports, but she always dodged my requests. My dad was always in bed but didn't seem very sick, and my mom insisted hospital care wasn't necessary. After a few visits, I started to suspect something was off, but I didn't want to falsely accuse my parents of lying about a medical emergency. I noticed my brother hadn't been visiting my parents, and they told me they didn't want to worry him because he's younger and should focus on his work. Yet, it was okay for me to be stressed out about them. I called my brother after a few weeks and found out he was on a European honeymoon that our parents had funded, which they hadn't mentioned to me at all. My brother said he had planned to surprise everyone with stories and photos from their trip after being MIA for a month. He had no intention of letting me know, but he got concerned when I mentioned our dad's illness. After talking to our parents, he told me they were fine and might have exaggerated the situation, making me look neurotic. Trying to give them the benefit of the doubt, I forced myself to believe they didn't want to ruin his honeymoon by telling him the truth. But deep down, I knew something wasn't right. My brother then mentioned his trip was costing our parents at least $125,000 because they were staying in the best hotels and dining at the finest restaurants. That's when it hit me that the money I lent my parents wasn't for a medical emergency at all. It was to fund my brother's extravagant honeymoon. I felt incredibly betrayed listening to my brother brag about his trip, realizing my parents had concocted a whole story just to get the money. There had been no medical emergency, no hospital visits, just a huge lie to pay for my brother's lavish honeymoon as their wedding gift. So, here's the lowdown on what happened with my parents and my brother. Basically, my folks bent over backward for my brother so he and his wife could have a sweet honeymoon. They didn't throw a big wedding because they were short on cash. The kicker? The money they used was supposed to be for my wedding fund. I felt totally betrayed when I found out. When I confronted my parents about it after a phone call, they admitted they made up some story because they knew I wouldn't lend them the money if I knew it was for my brother's honeymoon. They said he was having a tough time at work and was feeling pretty down, so they wanted him to have a good time without stressing about cash. They couldn't cover it themselves since it would mess up their retirement savings, so they borrowed from me instead. They figured I was still young, had plenty of working years ahead, and could earn it back, unlike them. They tried to brush it off, saying it was just money and they'd pay me back eventually. They wanted me to think of my brother first because the honeymoon had supposedly lifted his spirits. But man, I was pissed. This meant I'd have to trim my wedding budget for no good reason. I was cool with cutting down my wedding plans if it meant saving my dad's health, but this, not what I signed up for. Furious, I told them they had to pay me back before my wedding. I needed that money for a beach wedding, and even though my fiancé and his family were covering some expenses, I still had a lot to handle myself. My parents had decided early on that they could either pay for my college or my wedding, but not both. I chose college and had been saving up for my wedding ever since. To add salt to the wound, when my brother started college, I asked if he had to choose between college and wedding expenses too. He laughed in my face like it was the most ridiculous thing ever. I never brought it up with my parents to avoid stirring up trouble, especially since I needed their help back then. Years later, when I pushed them about the money and their favoritism, they denied it, but it was crystal clear. I told them they had to pay me back because I wasn't giving up my dream wedding just because my brother was struggling at work. My parents could coddle him on their dime, but I didn't save for 5 years to let them hand my money over to my brother. They said they couldn't repay me all at once before the wedding, and it would take a few years to pay it back. They expected me to be okay with this, talking about family and how I should care about my brother's feelings. Here's the thing, though. My brother wasn't going to get depressed over work. He didn't take his job seriously, which is why he sucked at it and earned so little. He's in sales, so his income is commission-based. If he's bad at it, that's on him. He might have been a bit down, but no way was he depressed. He didn't care about much because our parents spoiled him rotten his whole life. They made it out like he was having a crisis when he really wasn't. I explained to my parents that my wedding was super important to me, and I had committed to covering certain expenses. Without that money, I couldn't keep my promise. They just kept shaking their heads, saying no, they couldn't repay me before the wedding. I was reduced to begging, but they still refused. I left their place in tears. When I told my husband, he was beyond angry and wanted to get a lawyer involved. But without any written proof or contracts, we were stuck. We thought about suing her, but quickly realized it would just drain our bank account on lawyer fees without even being able to prove anything. We had no solid evidence, no texts. Everything was just verbal and off the record. So as much as we wanted to take action against my parents, we figured it wasn't worth the hassle or the money. Instead, we turned our attention to rethinking our wedding plans. Lucky for us, my husband's family came through big time. When they found out what my parents had done, his aunt offered us her farmhouse venue for free. We had always dreamed of a beach wedding, so she hadn't suggested it before. But now that we were exploring other options, she mentioned it, and I decided to go check it out. My husband had already seen the place, but the moment I walked in, I knew it was the one. It was beautiful, and even though it wasn't on the beach, we were happy with it. Plus, the fact that we could use it for free made it a no-brainer. I dove into wedding planning, which gave me even more reason to cut my parents off. I had already decided they weren't getting an invite, but I was unsure about my brother since he didn't know our parents had borrowed money from me for his sake. But then he called me after his honeymoon and went off on me for embarrassing our parents by asking for my money back. He said he heard everything from our mom and couldn't believe I was being difficult about it. He even suggested I should just suck it up and downsize the wedding until he could pay me back. That settled it for me. I wasn't inviting him either. And just like that, I stopped talking to both of them. Without my original wedding fund, I had to be careful with spending. Honestly, this turned out to be a blessing in disguise. The scaled-down wedding we ended up having was way more beautiful than the fancy one I had initially planned. It made us realize that our big day was about us, not impressing others. So, we decided to cut costs and use the saved money for something better afterward. Looking back, I'm thankful things worked out this way because our wedding was beautiful and dreamy, minus all the unnecessary pomp. We were surrounded by the people who truly mattered, and that's all we needed. Recently, I posted the wedding photos online. We had made sure that my parents and brother didn't know about the wedding to avoid any drama. But of course, they saw the photos and contacted me the next day, demanding to know why they weren't invited. I was surprised they even expected an invite, considering our last interaction had been a huge fight, and we hadn't spoken since. They've always tried to make me feel like everything was my fault, so I didn't understand why they thought they were still on the guest list. They were not only expecting an invite, but were also upset they missed the wedding. My parents called, then added my brother to the call so they could all yell at me together. I found it pretty entitled of them. I didn't need that drama while trying to enjoy my newlywed life, so I told them that since they had taken my money, I had to scale back the wedding and only invite close family and friends. They didn't make the cut, so I hung up and blocked them. An hour later, my husband told me that my brother had reached out to inform us that my parents were devastated by what I said. My mom had been crying nonstop and almost fainted from the stress. That made me feel guilty because I didn't mean to hurt them that badly. Maybe he was bluffing, but it's been making me feel weirdly bad ever since. So, Ita for not inviting my parents and brother to my wedding, given everything that happened? Hey everyone, so here's a quick update about my wedding fund drama. It's been a week since I last spoke to my parents and my brother, and I've decided to cut them off for good. My mom can cry all she wants, but it's not changing anything. I was in tears the day I confronted them about the stolen money, begging them to return it before the wedding, but they just shrugged it off. So now I'm giving them a taste of their own medicine. You reap what you sow, right? I've also told my brother to never contact me or my husband, especially my husband, because he has absolutely nothing to do with this mess. I blocked him after sending that message because I don't want my toxic family bothering us anymore. They've treated me like crap my whole life, and I've finally had enough. Honestly, if I could, I'd file a lawsuit to get my money back. It seems like a long shot since we don't have solid evidence, but my husband thinks it's worth a try. We've been talking to a reputable lawyer, and we'll decide in a few days. In the meantime, I need to figure out how to make them admit they borrowed the money under the guise of a medical emergency but actually gave it to my brother for a fun honeymoon. It might be hard to prove in court, but I'm determined to get my money back. Update time. Yesterday I told my brother not to drag my husband into our family drama. Of course, he took that as an invitation to do exactly that. After work, my husband told me my family had bombarded him with texts, demanding he convince me to unblock them. When he blocked them too, they escalated things by showing up at his workplace. They waited for him to leave, then started tailing and honking at him until he pulled over. Recognizing my brother's car, my husband decided to deal with them rather than let them follow him home and stress me out. They ended up at a nearby diner, where my family tried to argue that cutting them off over money was an overreaction. They said it wasn't fair for me to imply we're not family anymore just because they borrowed money. My parents claimed they'd eventually pay me back but couldn't do it all at once, and they had explained that to me multiple times. They tried to guilt-trip my husband into reminding me that we're family and I needed to stop acting like a brat. But my husband played it perfectly. Instead of confronting them, he pretended to be on their side and suggested they send me a heartfelt message acknowledging their mistakes. They actually bought it. My husband convinced them that if they admitted their wrongdoings, it might calm me down. As soon as they sent that message, we planned to use it as an admission of guilt and go after them legally. I'm so proud of my husband. He's an evil genius, but he's my evil genius. Update 3. My husband's plan worked like a charm. My parents and brother, like the idiots they are, sent me an email detailing all their lies and confessing to everything. Now that we have proof, our lawyers got the green light to move forward with the petition. Soon enough, we'll get our money back. $115,000 might not be a lot to some, but it's everything to me. I spent the last 5 years saving up for my future, sacrificing late nights and working hard to get where I am today. There's no way I'm letting it all go to waste because of my brother. My brother is super lazy and my parents are enabling him, so we're planning to sue them. No matter what, we're getting my money back. On a happier note, we're starting to plan our honeymoon. It's going to be a short trip to the beach again, which is really special for us since that's where everything began. We might go on a longer vacation in a few months and really make the most of it, but for now, this trip will do. We've realized we don't need to spend tons of money to impress people. We just need to do what makes us happy, and that's exactly what we're doing. Unlike my brother, who flooded social media with his honeymoon photos to show off, we want to keep it low-key. It's ironic, though, because now he's facing a lawsuit, and it's honestly pretty sad. But hey, they brought this on themselves, so they deserve whatever comes their way.